The alarm was the kind that suggested either imminent reactor failure or the end of the known universe. Chief Security Officer Krell preferred the reactor failure option. He stood in Station Nexus 9's Security Command Center, scales rigid with tension, staring at the cafeteria surveillance feed like it was personally offending him. Which in a way it was. "Explain," he said slowly. "What I am seeing." His deputy, a nervous Thalxian with too many eyes and not enough courage, gestured helplessly at the screen. "Sir, we've confirmed visual 3 times. It's not a glitch. It should be a glitch." On screen, 3 Vrakken cubs sat at a cafeteria table. That alone was wrong. Vrakken cubs didn't sit. They prowled. They hunted. They turned maintenance drones into abstract art. But that wasn't the worst part. The worst part was the human. Engineer Cassidy Rourke sat with them, calmly eating lunch while 3 juvenile apex predators, each the size of a large dog, covered in black scales and defensive spikes, gnawed on something wrapped in bread. Not attacking, not threatening, eating lunch together. "This is a Category 5 biological contamination event," Krell announced to the room. "Should we sound the evacuation alarm?" someone asked. "It's already sounding. That's not helping." One of the cubs made a chirping sound. Actually chirped, like it was happy. Krell's translator struggled to process his next string of profanity. "The cubs are consuming human food," his deputy observed, because apparently stating the obvious was his primary job skill. "Voluntarily. I can see that." "Sir, permission to speak freely?" "Denied. The Vrakken don't share meals. They don't even share space, and they definitely don't let prey species near their young." Krell turned slowly. "I said denied." "Yes, sir. But also, what do we do?" "Good question." Krell grabbed his sidearm and headed for the cafeteria. By the time Krell arrived with 4 armed security officers, Cassidy had finished her lunch and was scratching one cub behind what might have been its ear ridge. The cub's eyes were half closed in contentment. Krell's sanity was half broken in horror. "Step away from the predators!" Cassidy looked up, blinked. "They're kids. Also, we're eating. Rude." "Those kids have killed maintenance drones." "Yeah, because nobody fed them properly. Have you seen the nutrient paste you give them?" Cassidy made a face. "I wouldn't eat that either." The cub she'd been scratching nudged her hand, made a sound that was disturbingly close to a purr. Krell's brain made the error noise. "Explain," he managed, holstering his weapon because pointing it seemed increasingly pointless. "Now, how did you compromise the Vrakken cubs?" "I didn't compromise anything." Cassidy wiped her hands on a napkin. "I just shared my lunch." "You shared your lunch?" "Yeah. I had extra sandwiches. They looked hungry. So I gave them some." She shrugged like this was completely normal behavior and not, in fact, insane. "They should have torn you apart." "Why? I gave them food. Nobody tears apart the person giving them food. They are apex predators. They're also like 3 years old. 4? I don't know Vrakken aging. Point is, they're kids." Another cub climbed into Cassidy's lap. She adjusted to accommodate it like this was a regular Tuesday. "This is Spike, that's Chomper. And the one hiding under the table is Bitey." "You named them." "They needed names. Couldn't keep calling them the murder lizards." Krell sat down heavily in a chair that protested his weight. "This is a nightmare. This is lunch." Cassidy pulled out her tablet, showing him security footage. "Look, 3 days ago I was doing maintenance near their enclosure. They looked miserable. The stuff you're feeding them is basically compressed sadness. So I tossed them some of my sandwich. They ate it. Next day they were waiting by the fence, so I brought more. Then yesterday, someone left their enclosure door unlocked. That was an accident. And they found me in the cafeteria. We've been eating together since." She looked at Krell seriously. "They're not dangerous. They're just lonely and hungry." One of the security officers leaned toward Krell. "Sir, what are your orders?" Krell watched Spike, apparently that was its name now, curl up against Cassidy's side like a scaly, spiked cat. "I need to report this," he said quietly. "To everyone. Immediately." The emergency meeting was held in Commander Thalix's office, which was too small for the sheer amount of confusion it now contained. Commander Thalix, an insectoid being whose species valued order above all else, looked at the assembled group with mounting horror. "Walk me through this again." Krell activated the holographic display. Security footage played in slow motion. Cassidy approaching the cub's enclosure, kneeling, holding out food. The cubs approaching cautiously, then eating, then following her. "Fascinating," xenobiologist Mora said, their gaseous forms swirling with interest. The human approaches with non-threatening posture, offers food, waits for acceptance. "The cubs should have attacked immediately," Thalix insisted. "Their species has a documented 98% aggression response to approach behavior." "But they didn't," Mora continued, replaying the footage again. "Because the human employed a dominant strategy unknown to Vrakken's social structures." Cassidy, sitting in the corner with all 3 cubs now clustered around her feet, raised her hand. "I didn't employ anything. I was hungry. They looked hungry. I had extra sandwiches." "Impossibly naive," Mora mused. "Or impossibly clever. I cannot determine which." "I'm going with naive," Cassidy offered helpfully. Krell leaned forward. "The problem is larger than you understand. The cubs are now following her. Everywhere. They've imprinted." "Imprinted?" Thalix's antennae twitched. "As in permanent behavioral bonding?" "As in they think she's their parent." Cassidy's eyes went wide. "Oh, that's not great." "No," Krell agreed. "It's not." Commander Thalix stood, pacing with an anxiety that his species usually reserved for paperwork discrepancies. "This is a diplomatic nightmare. The Vrakken Empire sent those cubs as part of the cultural exchange program. They're children of high-ranking military officials. If they think we've weaponized their young, if they believe we've compromised them somehow—" The alarm went off again. Everyone jumped except Cassidy, who just looked annoyed. Thalix stabbed the comm button. "What now?" "Sir, the cubs have escaped their enclosure, again. They're heading toward the human quarters." Krell turned to Cassidy. "How are they escaping?" "I might have accidentally taught them how to open doors." "You what?" "They were scratching at it. I felt bad." Cassidy checked her watch. Then, with the casual tone of someone discussing the weather, "Oh yeah, it's dinner time. I usually feed them around now." Krell stared at her. The silence stretched. "You've been feeding them," he said slowly. "Regularly?" "Well, yeah. They get hungry around 1800 hours. I've been bringing them." "You've been feeding them regularly?" "They're kids. Of course I've been feeding them regularly. What kind of monster would I be if I didn't?" Mora's gaseous form pulsed with something that might have been amusement. "Commander, I believe we need to expand this investigation." "Expand it how?" "We need to understand what, exactly, the human has done." Mora turned to Cassidy. "How many times have you fed them?" "I don't know. 8, 10 times? And each time you gave them food unprompted?" "Yeah?" "Without expecting anything in return?" "They're babies. I'm not going to charge babies for food." Mora turned to the group. "The human has established a caregiving pattern. In Vrakken psychology, this creates a bond stronger than genetic kinship." Thalix's antennae drooped. "Meaning?" "Meaning," Krell said, rubbing his temples, "that as far as those cubs are concerned, Cassidy is now their mother." Cassidy looked down at the 3 apex predators clustered around her. Spike looked up, chirped happily. "Well," she said, "this got complicated." Outside, the cubs reached the human quarters and started scratching at the door. Nobody had the heart to tell them their mom was in a meeting. 3 days later, the Vrakken diplomatic ship arrived with all the subtlety of a meteor strike. Station Nexus 9's docking bay had seen a lot of vessels. Cargo haulers, science ships, the occasional pleasure cruiser that got very lost. But nothing quite like this. A warship painted in the deep crimson of the Vrakken Empire, bristling with weapons that looked functional rather than decorative. Krell stood at attention with the reception committee, trying not to sweat visibly. The airlock hissed open. Ambassador Thrak emerged, and Krell's survival instinct screamed at him to run. Thrak was massive even by Vrakken standards, 9 feet of scarred scales and accumulated violence. His armor bore the marks of actual combat, not ceremonial dress. One eye was milky white from an old wound. The other burned with intelligence and barely contained fury. "Where?" Thrak rumbled, his voice like grinding stone. "Are my cubs?" Commander Thalix stepped forward, antennae quivering. "Ambassador, if we could discuss— Cubs! Now!" Someone called Cassidy. She arrived 5 minutes later with Spike, Chomper, and Bitey trailing behind her like a very dangerous parade. The moment the cubs saw Thrak, they abandoned Cassidy completely. Krell felt a moment of hope. The cubs rushed toward the ambassador, chirping excitedly. Thrak knelt, and they swarmed him, rubbing against his scales, making happy sounds, clearly recognizing him. "Thank the stars," Thalix whispered. "They remember their own kind." Then Spike grabbed Thrak's hand in his mouth, gently, and started pulling. "What is—" Thrak allowed himself to be dragged. The other cubs joined in, pushing him from behind, straight toward Cassidy. "Oh no," Krell said. The cubs positioned Thrak directly in front of the human, then sat back looking extremely pleased with themselves. Thrak stared down at Cassidy. Cassidy looked up at Thrak. "You are the human," Thrak said slowly. "That's what my ID badge says, yeah. You have—" Thrak's claws flexed. "You have taught our young to eat bread. It's a pretty versatile food group. Good carbs. Pairs well with protein." Thrak began circling Cassidy like a predator examining prey, except the prey was completely unfazed, and the predator looked increasingly confused. "Our species," Thrak said, "does not share food outside kinship bonds. To share food is to claim pack." Cassidy blinked. "Oh. Is that bad? You have accidentally adopted 3 Vrakken cubs into your pack." Silence. Then Krell's translator made a sound like it was dying as he tried to process his scream. The conference room felt too small for the amount of cultural miscommunication it was about to contain. Ambassador Thrak sat at the head of the table, studying Cassidy like she was a particularly complex military strategy. The cubs had refused to leave her side, so now 3 juvenile apex predators were napping in a pile at her feet. "Explain human pack dynamics," Thrak commanded. "We don't really have pack dynamics," Cassidy said. "Not like you're thinking." "Then how do you raise young? Schools? Parents? Sometimes grandparents? It varies a lot, actually. Every family's different." Thrak's scales rippled, a sign of deep confusion. "And you share food with non-kin?" "All the time. It's called being polite." "Polite?" Thrak repeated the word like it was in a foreign language, which technically it was. "Humans regularly feed individuals outside their genetic line for politeness?" "Yeah. Also, restaurants exist. That's like the whole business model." Thrak sat down heavily, his chair protesting. "Your species, commodified pack bonding?" Xenobiologist Mora chose that moment to float into the conversation, their gaseous forms swirling helpfully. "I should mention, Ambassador, that humans also keep predators as companions, for emotional support." "Emotional support?" Thrak's functioning eye narrowed. Mora projected a hologram. Dogs, cats, various other Earth creatures humans had decided to befriend. "These are wolves," Thrak said, pointing at a golden retriever. "Well, they were," Cassidy admitted. "Our ancestors domesticated them like 30,000 years ago. Now we mostly just feed them and throw balls." "You domesticated apex pack hunters for recreation and companionship. Dogs are great, very loyal. They love you unconditionally as long as you feed them and give them attention." Thrak looked at the cubs wrestling playfully at Cassidy's feet. Looked back at the hologram of a human child hugging a golden retriever. Looked at Cassidy again. "What have you done to them?" "I gave them sandwiches." Chomper looked up at Cassidy. Made a happy chirp. Then proudly brought her his favorite toy, a demolished maintenance bot he'd been carrying around. Cassidy took it, examining the twisted metal. "Good boy, Chomper. Very impressive destruction." She scratched behind his ear ridge. Chomper's eyes closed in bliss. Thrak's expression was pure existential horror. "They bring you trophies," he whispered. "They seek your approval. They have adopted human behavioral patterns." "They're just playing," Cassidy said. "Playing? Vrakken cubs do not play. They train. They hunt." "Maybe they'd like to do both," Cassidy shrugged. "Kids need structure, sure, but they also need to have fun." Krell, sitting in the corner, made a note on his tablet. "Human has broken Ambassador Thrak. Send replacement." The Emergency Diplomatic Council was called 6 hours later. Everyone who mattered was there. Commander Thalix, Krell, Mora, Thrak, and Cassidy. The cubs had been temporarily secured in her quarters, though the scratching sounds coming through the door suggested this was temporary at best. "The cubs cannot return to Vrakken space," Thrak announced. Thalix's antennae shot up. "Excuse me? They are compromised." "Compromised how?" "They have bonded with a prey species. They exhibit non-aggressive behavior. They seek approval rather than dominance." Thrak's claws scraped the table. "They will be rejected by Vrakken society, possibly executed." "What?" Cassidy stood so fast her chair fell over. "You'd kill them?" "Weakness is not tolerated in our culture. Affection for prey species is the ultimate weakness. They're children. They are future warriors. And they have been contaminated." Krell leaned forward. "So what do you propose, Ambassador?" Thrak turned to Cassidy. "The human has claimed them as pack. By Vrakken law, she is now responsible for their upbringing." "I'm sorry. What?" "You shared food. You established a pack bond. You are now—" Thrak searched for. "Thrak, the word. What is the human term?" "Parent. I'm 26. I can barely take care of a houseplant. Yet, you have successfully raised 3 apex predators to trust you, to follow you, to bring you tribute." Thrak gestured toward her quarters, where the scratching had intensified. "They are yours now." "This is insane," Krell said. "This is Vrakken law." "There has to be another option," Commander Thalix insisted. "There is." Thrak's voice went cold. "We execute them for contamination. Prevent the weakness from spreading." Cassidy looked at the door to her quarters. At the cubs who were probably destroying her furniture while waiting for her. At Thrak, who seemed completely serious. "You'd really kill them?" "It is tradition." "That's a terrible tradition." "Nevertheless." The scratching stopped. A moment later, 3 cubs managed to force the door open and rushed into the room. They went straight to Cassidy, climbing over each other to get close to her. She sat down on the floor. They immediately piled into her lap, despite being collectively larger than she was. Spike looked at her shoelaces, started chewing. "So I'm a mom now?" Cassidy asked quietly. Thrak nodded grimly. "You are a mom now." Somewhere in the background, Krell was screaming into his hands. Cassidy looked at the 3 cubs. They looked back with absolute trust. She sighed. "I'm going to need a bigger quarters." "And a lot more sandwiches," Mora added helpfully. Thrak stood. "I will inform the Vrakken Empire. The cubs are now under human guardianship. May your pack bonding abilities serve you well." He left. Commander Thalix stared at Cassidy. "Do you have any idea what you've just agreed to?" Cassidy looked at Bitey, who was now gnawing on her boot. "Honestly? Not even a little bit." "They're going to grow," Krell said. "A lot." "How much is a lot?" 8 feet, maybe 9. "Oh. And they breathe fire." "They what?" Chomper burped. A small flame escaped. Cassidy patted his head. "We'll figure it out." And somehow, impossibly, she believed it. 2 weeks later, Cassidy's quarters looked like a natural disaster had teamed up with a construction accident. The furniture was shredded. Not damaged. Shredded. Her couch existed only as a concept now, scattered in foam pieces across the floor. The walls bore deep scratch marks at varying heights, creating an artistic timeline of cub growth. Half the ceiling panels were missing, presumably eaten or relocated to wherever cubs stashed things they found interesting. The cubs themselves had grown. Significantly. They were now the size of ponies. Large ponies. The kind that made you wonder if they'd been taking growth hormones. Cassidy sat cross-legged on her demolished floor, reading from a datapad while Spike gnawed on what used to be her desk chair. Chapter 8. Teaching Your Cubs to Hunt, she read aloud. Step 1. Release live prey into environment and observe natural predation instincts. She looked at the 3 cubs, who were currently wrestling over a support strut. Yeah, that's not happening. Instead, she'd improvised, which is how she ended up in the station's maintenance bay at 0900 hours, teaching 3 juvenile apex predators to play fetch with decommissioned reactor components. A small crowd had gathered to watch, station crew members who should have been working but found this infinitely more entertaining. Cassidy threw a twisted piece of metal plating. Fetch! All 3 cubs took off, scales gleaming, claws scrabbling for purchase on the deck plates. Chomper got there first, grabbed the metal in his jaws, and proudly trotted back. Good boy! Cassidy scratched behind his ear ridge. A junior engineer leaned toward his colleague. Should they be playing with reactor components? Those are decommissioned, Cassidy called back. Probably. Bitey decided to contribute by breathing fire at a support beam. For fun. The beam began to melt. Okay, Cassidy shouted. Outside voices only for the fire breathing. Inside, we use our words. They don't have words, the junior engineer pointed out. They have chirps. Close enough. Spike brought back the metal plating. And a junction box. And what might have been someone's lunch container. I only threw one thing, buddy. Spike looked proud of himself anyway. Ambassador Vrakken arrived mid-training session to check on progress. He found Cassidy teaching the cubs to sit, stay, and not eat the engineering staff. The cubs were moderately successful at 2 out of 3. This is not traditional Vrakken upbringing, Vrakken observed. Yeah, well, I'm not a traditional Vrakken, Cassidy replied, convincing Chomper to release a technician's tool belt. I'm working with what I've got. Traditional methods involve live combat training, dominance establishment, survival conditioning. Traditional methods sound traumatic. They produce warriors. So does teaching them boundaries, cooperation, and not setting things on fire indoors. Cassidy pointed at Bitey, who was eyeing another support beam. No. Bad. We talked about this. Bitey sat down, looking guilty. Thrak's scales rippled. You disciplined him with words. And a firm tone. Works great. He is an apex predator. He's also 3. Discipline at this age is about consistency and clear expectations. Cassidy threw the metal plating again. All 3 cubs charged after it. They're doing great, actually. No one's been eaten in over a week. That is not a high bar. It's higher than it was. Vrakken watched Spike return with the plating, 2 more junction boxes, and a security drone that was still transmitting. I do not understand your methods, Vrakken admitted, but I cannot argue with results. They are healthy, happy, they listen to you. They're good kids, just needed structure and someone who wouldn't give up on them. Vrakken was quiet for a moment. Then, the Vrakken Empire is watching this experiment closely. It's not an experiment, it's parenting. To us, they are the same thing. 3 days later, Station Nexus 9 hosted a diplomatic function. 12 species, formal reception. Grand hall decked out in decorations that said, "We are very serious about intergalactic relations." The cubs were supposed to be secured in Cassidy's quarters. They were not. The first sign of trouble was the screaming. The second sign was 3 juvenile Vrakken predators bursting through the main doors like they'd been launched from a cannon. Immediate panic. Dignitaries scattered. Security drew weapons. Someone activated the emergency shields, which trapped everyone inside with the cubs. The cubs, unbothered by the chaos, headed straight for the buffet table. "Secure the dignitaries!" Krell shouted into his comm. Cassidy sprinted into the hall, still wearing her maintenance jumpsuit. "Wait! They're just hungry! They're attacking! They're heading for food! There's a difference!" The cubs reached the buffet. Spike stood on his hind legs, examining the spread. Chomper sniffed the appetizers. Bitey tried to figure out if decorative ice sculptures were edible. Cassidy grabbed a plate, started loading it with food, sat down on the floor right there in the middle of the grand hall. "Guys, over here." 3 heads turned. The cubs abandoned the buffet table and rushed to Cassidy, sat around her in a circle like this was a completely normal picnic. She fed them appetizers one by one. The entire diplomatic corps stood frozen. 3 apex predators eating canapes while a human in a jumpsuit scratched their heads. A Thalaxian diplomat whispered to his aide, "What kind of death world produces this behavior?" Then, slowly, cautiously, he approached. May I pet one?" Cassidy looked up. "Sure, but ask permission first. They're good boys, but they have boundaries." The diplomat knelt, extended a trembling hand toward Spike. Spike sniffed, then leaned into the touch. The diplomat's eyes widened. "Remarkable." Within 10 minutes, half the diplomatic corps was sitting on the floor, hand-feeding apex predators. The Vexarian ambassador offered Chomper a pastry. The Krill attaché was scratching Bitey behind his ear ridges. A group of Thalaxians were taking commemorative photos. Krell stood at the edge of the room, watching his carefully planned security protocols dissolve into an impromptu petting zoo. He felt himself aging in real time. Commander Thalix appeared beside him. "Should we do something?" "Like what?" "They're happy. The dignitaries are happy. The cubs are happy." Krell rubbed his temples. "I'm updating my resignation letter." "You say that every week." "This week I mean it." Later that night, long after the diplomatic function had ended and the grand hall had been cleaned, Thrak visited Cassidy's quarters. She was doing maintenance reports while the cubs slept in a pile around her. They'd gotten even bigger somehow. Her quarters now resembled a cave inhabited by very large, very peaceful reptiles. "I understand. Now," Thrak said quietly from the doorway. Cassidy looked up. "Understand what? Why the cubs followed you. Why they trust you. Why our species has never conquered Earth despite your obvious vulnerability. We're not that vulnerable. You are prey-sized, soft-skinned, with no natural weapons. By all biological logic, any predator species should have eliminated you millennia ago." He gestured to the sleeping cubs. "But you don't see predators and prey. You see potential pack. You share food not because you have abundance, but because that is how you create bonds." Cassidy shrugged, careful not to disturb Spike's head on her lap. "I mean, yeah? Making friends is nice. Life's better when you're not alone." "You weaponized kindness." Thrak's voice held something between awe and fear. "You turn predators into family. You make the dangerous become loyal. That is more terrifying than any weapon the galaxy has ever seen. I just gave them sandwiches. You gave them trust first. You offered food without knowing if they would attack. You shared before they proved themselves worthy. That is not logical. That is not strategic." He paused. "That is not something any other species would do." Cassidy scratched Spike behind his ear ridge. The cub made a content sound in his sleep. "They were just scared and hungry. Nobody deserves that." Thrak stared at her for a long moment. At this small, soft human surrounded by apex predators who would die for her, who had learned gentleness from the least dangerous creature on the station. "The galaxy is not ready for your species," he said quietly. "The galaxy's had us for a while now. We're not going anywhere." "That," Thrak said, "is what terrifies me." He left her there, surrounded by her accidental children, protected by the very creatures that should have killed her. And somewhere deep in his mind, Thrak began to understand why the Vrakken Empire had never successfully invaded Earth. It wasn't because humans were strong. It was because humans made strength obsolete. They simply befriended everything that tried to kill them. And somehow, impossibly, it worked. 3 months later, everything had changed. The cubs weren't cubs anymore. They were adolescents, 8 feet tall, fully scaled, with the kind of presence that made people instinctively check their life insurance policies. But instead of terrorizing the station, they were helping Cassidy rewire junction boxes in Sector 12. Spike held the diagnostic tool in his jaws, passing it to Cassidy when she needed it. Chomper steadied her ladder with one massive claw. Bitey, who'd discovered he was good at tight spaces, was crawling through maintenance ducts, reporting back with chirps that Cassidy had learned to translate. It was the weirdest maintenance crew the station had ever seen. It was also the most efficient. "Panel 23 is corroded," Cassidy called up to Bitey. A chirp, then a different chirp, then something that sounded like disagreement. "You sure?" "Run another diagnostic." Another chirp. This one more confident. "Okay, I trust you. Mark it for replacement." A passing junior engineer stopped, stared. "Did you just have a conversation with—" "Yep. But he doesn't—" "Nope. How do you—" "Practice." The engineer left, muttering about updating his transfer request. It wasn't just the cubs anymore. During station tours, other species young started gravitating toward Cassidy. A juvenile Thalaxian followed her for 3 hours, mimicking her movements. A krill hatchling brought her a shiny bolt it had found. A Vexian pup sat at her feet during lunch, hoping for scraps. Krell noticed, filed reports, tried not to think about the implications. Then Ambassador Vrakken returned. With company. Vrakken High Command arrived on a ship that made their previous vessel look like a shuttle. 5 members of the ruling council, each more decorated and terrifying than the last. They requested an immediate meeting. Commander Thalix's office couldn't fit everyone, so they used the observation deck. Cassidy stood before the High Command, flanked by her 3 fully grown cubs, wondering what she'd done wrong this time. "We have a problem," Vrakken announced. "Here it comes," Cassidy thought. "The cubs you raised have become exemplary citizens." "Wait, what? Is that bad?" she asked. One of the High Command members, General Vrakken according to his insignia, stepped forward. "No, it's revolutionary. They are cooperative, empathetic, productive. They work in teams. They consider others' well-being. These are not traditional Vrakken traits." "Oh, well, thank you. We want you," General Vrakken continued, "to establish a human-style upbringing program for Vrakken youth." Silence. "You want me to run a preschool for apex predators," Cassidy said slowly. "Essentially, yes." Krell, listening from the back of the room, made a strangled sound. "Absolutely not. Insurance won't cover it." "Insurance will be provided by the Vrakken Empire," Vrakken said. "My sanity won't cover it." Also provided. Another High Command member, Admiral Kresh, activated a holographic display. It showed multiple space stations, different locations, all with human staff. "We've been monitoring other stations with human personnel. The pattern repeats. Wherever humans interact with young of other species, pack bonds form." The display zoomed in on a dozen different scenes, humans sharing meals with alien juveniles, playing games, teaching basic skills. Always the same pattern, always the same result: trust. Cassidy stared at the data. "Are you saying humans are accidentally adopting the galaxy?" "Yes," Admiral Kresh said simply. "And we want to make it intentional." 6 months later, Station Nexus 9 had been completely transformed. The official name was Multi-Species Youth Integration Facility. Unofficially, everyone called it the preschool, much to Commander Thalix's irritation. 20 human staff members, 200 young aliens from 40 different species. The administrative nightmare alone should have collapsed the project. Instead, it thrived. Cassidy was now the director, a position she'd accepted with the words, "I guess this is my life now," and a resignation that had become something like peace. Her 3 original cubs, now fully grown, worked as assistant caregivers. Spike was surprisingly gentle with the smaller species. Chomper had patience for teaching. Bitey had discovered a talent for conflict resolution, probably because nobody argued when an 8-foot apex predator suggested they share. The daily routine was chaos. Beautiful, functional chaos. In the central cafeteria, human staff members sat with groups of juvenile aliens, all eating together. A human teacher shared fruit slices with Thalaxian kits, a species known for extreme xenophobia and territorial aggression. The kits took the fruit carefully, made happy chittering sounds, and offered their own food in return. Xenobiologist Mora floated nearby, monitoring everything with scientific fascination. "This should not work," Mora said for the 1000th time. "The biological imperatives should prevent—" A human toddler, daughter of one of the staff, waddled up to a juvenile Thalaxian, offered a cracker. The Thalaxian, who by all documented behavior should have attacked, carefully took one cracker, made a happy sound, offered the toddler a piece of dried root in exchange. I have no framework for understanding this, Mora whispered. Krell walked past a common room. Inside, humans were teaching alien cubs to play tag. Species that had been at war for centuries were running around together, laughing in their various ways, completely unbothered by historical enmities. He sat down heavily on a bench. Had a moment. This is the weirdest posting I've ever had, he muttered. Something warm pressed against his side. Spike had sat down next to him, holding half a sandwich in his mouth. Offered it. Krell looked at the sandwich, looked at the massive apex predator offering to share lunch. Took it. Thanks, kid. Spike chirped happily. Krell ate the sandwich and wondered when his life had become a children's education program. Final scene. The central cafeteria was packed with dozens of alien young, all different species, all eating together, playing together, existing peacefully in a space that should have been impossible. A new security officer, Officer Drent, fresh from the academy, approached Cassidy during lunch. Krell had finally gotten his transfer to literally anywhere quieter, and Drent was trying to understand his new assignment. I read the reports, Drent said, watching the chaos with obvious confusion. But I don't understand. Why did they eat with you? Why do they trust you? Cassidy looked at the room. At the cubs and kits and pups and hatchlings. At humans sharing food with creatures that evolution said they shouldn't trust. At trust happening anyway. Because I shared first, she said simply. Before they knew to trust me. Before they knew I was safe. I gave them food when they were hungry. I gave them attention when they were scared. I didn't wait for them to prove they deserved it. She picked up a piece of fruit, handed it to a Vexian pup who'd been watching hopefully. You can't buy trust. You can't threaten someone into caring about you. But if you share what you have, especially when you don't have much, people remember that. She shrugged. Doesn't matter if they're human or Vrakken or Thalaxian or whatever. Hungry is hungry, scared is scared, and kindness is kindness. On the observation deck above, Ambassador Thrak stood with Commander Thalix, watching the cafeteria. In 3 years, Thrak said quietly, every major species in the Council has requested human childcare workers. I know, Thalix replied. The applications are overwhelming. In 5 years, an entire generation will have been raised partially by humans. Yes. In 10 years... Thrak paused. In 10 years what? Thrak watched Cassidy share her lunch with a dozen different species. Watched Spike gently help a small krill hatchling reach the food dispenser. Watched species that had fought wars now playing games together. In 10 years, we won't remember why we were afraid of each other. Below, Cassidy laughed as Chomper accidentally knocked over a chair trying to demonstrate proper sitting technique to a group of fascinated juveniles. Bitey helped clean up the mess. Spike distributed napkins. The galaxy had been conquered, not with weapons, not with threats, not with force. With sandwiches, patience, and the radical idea that maybe everyone deserves someone who'll share their lunch. And if that wasn't the most human thing ever, nothing was.